Is going to be from Genesis 16:13. Genesis 16:13. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God who sees, for she said, I have even remained alive here after seeing him. That was Genesis 16:13.
We're going to talk about a moment in history that's recorded in the Bible, and it's not very famous. The setting isn't that important. If you were to see it, it probably wouldn't really attract your attention, and the person involved is not that significant either, and it's just a brief conversation, but I think it's worth really taking a close look at because it tells us a lot about ourselves, and I think it tells us a lot about God. It's about a woman at a well, and it's not the one in the New Testament. We're going to be looking at Genesis 15 in that area here shortly. This woman was having a really rough time. Things were not going well for her. She was going to have a baby, but she was alone, kind of on her own. She had nowhere to stay, no food, probably no money. All she really had going for her at this point was she had a source of water. She was at a well. She hadn't necessarily done anything wrong to any great extent. In fact, she's in the situation that she is mainly because of someone else's mistake. So I'm going to go back a little bit to explain how she got there. And if you go to Genesis 15, you're very familiar with this. It's where God promised Abram that he's going to have children and that he will have countless descendants. And if you look at Genesis 15, verse 5, this is where we'll start this morning. You know this really well. God takes him aside. It says, and he took him outside and said, now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And you know that everything about this situation made this outcome very unlikely. Abram and Sarai were old, and sure enough, time goes by, and nothing happens. I don't know if you know that the promise was not fulfilled the next day. In fact, it wasn't even fulfilled the next year. Several years were going by. And so you can imagine from Abram and Sarai's perspective, things are not playing out how they might hope. So Sarai makes a mistake, and she essentially tries to help God run things. And she comes up with a contingency plan. It's in Genesis 16, starting with verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Notice the way how she puts that. Please go in to my maid, perhaps I will obtain children through her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So Sarai got a bad idea, and Abram went along with this bad idea. And in fact, you could argue it's one of the worst decisions ever made. It resulted in consequences that are still affecting the world today. Millions of people affected by this decision. But first it affected one person in particular. If you go to Genesis 16, verse 3, we're going to focus on this one person. After Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar the Egyptian, her maid, notice the 10 years, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. He went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight. And Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done me be upon you. I gave my maid into your arms. When she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. So Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. So Sarai's bad idea resulted in Hagar getting pregnant, and Hagar was angry. Sarai told Abram about it. Abram basically said, you handle it. So Sarai handled it badly, and mistreated Hagar, and finally Hagar ran away. So I tell you all this to know how she got there, how Hagar ended up at this well. Things are not going good. She's going to have a baby, but she's all alone. She has nowhere to stay. No food, probably no money. All she has is this well. It's probably a very low point in her life. And mostly because of other people's decisions. Not sure what her plan was, but she ended up at this well. I don't know how she got there, but I know she left where she usually was. And apparently we're going to find out that she had no real plan. But God is essentially going to have a conversation with her. And like I mentioned, it's going to show us something about us. I think it's going to teach us something about us and also teach us something about God. Genesis 16, verse 7. This conversation is about to begin. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. The angel of the Lord, he appears to Hagar and approaches her. And by the way, I think it's really worth noticing there are big things in motion. The plan that we mentioned earlier is an epic plan. Ultimately, it will involve millions of lives, countless lives, and eventually the whole world. And here's this one individual. She's just this one person, and she's not even part of the original plan. Apparently insignificant and irrelevant. In the grand scheme of things, Hagar is just a little blip on the radar. She's nothing as far as the world might be concerned. As far as the big plan, she could just die out here and everything would go on as planned, business as usual. Nobody'd even really think twice about it ultimately. But God sent his angel to this insignificant and irrelevant woman. The angel arrived and started asking questions. So I think it's really worth pointing out that God is sending this angel to this seemingly insignificant person. But here's the conversation, Genesis 16, verse 8. He said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. So we're going to take a second to kind of notice this conversation. Two questions are asked. Where have you come from and where are you going? I think it's worth pointing out she doesn't answer either question. She essentially ignores them. He says, where have you come from? Where are you going? And she responds by saying, I'm running away. The angel, notice the questions. The angel is focusing the questions on the past, where have you come from, and the future, where are you going? Hagar is focused on the present. Notice again the conversation. It's worth pointing out. Where have you come from? Where are you going? I'm running away. So he says, what about the past? What about the future? She says, the present. Maybe she didn't have any decent answers to these questions. Where have you come from? She could say, well, Abram's household, things aren't going well there. Where are you going? I bet if she was pressed to answer that, she would have to say, I don't know. But these are just guesses. She ignored both questions. What's funny is it's pretty clear that the angel already knew the answer to both questions. Notice by what's about to be said that he already knows. He knew the answer to where have you come from. Notice verse 9. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority. That implies he knows where she came from. But then the angel also kind of answers the second question. What about the future? The angel passes along a message from God, and it's a message that sounds very familiar, very similar to another message given to someone else. I don't know if you ever noticed, but Abrams is not the only one who received this important message. Genesis 16, verse 10. Moreover, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants, so that they will be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are with child, and you will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live to the east of all his brothers. Basically, the message is this. You and your child are going to survive. There is going to be a future. In fact, you're going to have a lot of descendants, too many to count. You're going to have a son, and you need to name him Ishmael. But I want to draw attention to one particular part of the message. It says, the Lord has given heed to your affliction. In other words, God knows all about your situation. He's very aware of you. He knows all about the troubles you have. And this brings up a very important question. Why? God has set in motion an epic plan involving Abram and Sarai's children who would become a powerful nation. It's all about governments and politics, an incredible power struggle moving through generations. And ultimately, it's all about saving the world. And here's Hagar, nothing but a footnote. Worse, an accidental footnote. Yet God focused on her. Why? There's really only one answer. Because she mattered. She mattered to God. She was not insignificant or irrelevant. And this really shocked Hagar. It really meant a lot to her. Notice what she says in Genesis 16, verse 13. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God who sees." For she said, "Have I even remained alive here after seeing him?" I don't know what Hagar's thoughts were about God before this, but I believe her perspective of God was changed. She says, "You are a God who sees." Which probably means that before this point, she thought God was a God who didn't see. In other words, didn't really care about unimportant people. And that leads us to something pretty profound. I think we can easily draw this conclusion. You ready? There are no unimportant people. There are no insignificant people. We set up levels of importance for us. There's that some people matter more than others, maybe depending on how much they affect the world. But to God, every single person matters. I know that sounds like just a motivational poster, but you really need to hear this. 1 Timothy 2:4, I'll show you a couple other verses that support this. Everybody is significant to God. Here he is pausing in this grand scheme to save the world, this plan to spend time focused on this one woman. 1 Timothy 2:4 supports this about God. It talks about how he desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. He wants everybody to make it out of here alive. 2 Peter 3, verse 9. There's a lot of beliefs today that suggest that some people are expendable, just kind of, I guess, extras in the big plan. But according to God, that's not the case at all. 2 Peter 3:9, the Lord is not slow about his promises. Some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. God is deeply involved in every single soul, and this is something that Hagar learned. I don't think she fully understood that before this day. In fact, the well is named at this point. The name that's given is Bir Lahai Roi, and it means the well of the living one who sees me. That's something that Hagar learned that day. You're the God who sees me. And then Hagar went home, but she went home with a new perspective on God. If you were to ask Hagar back then her thoughts about God, there's one thing she would tell you: he is a God who sees you. Not like we usually think, where he's watching you, eager to punish your mistakes. We're not talking about that. Yeah, there are consequences for our mistakes, and he's well aware of those, but he sees you. He sees your troubles. He's focused on your situation, and he longs to bless you. I believe this is recorded, this encounter with Hagar. I think it's recorded for a reason. I think it can tell us something about ourselves and something about God. Because we all have a turn. We have many turns where we get to be in the middle of a bad situation. It might be a result of our mistakes. It might be a result of other people's mistakes, or maybe for no apparent reason at all. And we're like Hagar at the well. Remember, the angel said, "Where have you come from and where are you going?" Those aren't the questions that come to mind. We tend to do what Hagar did. We focus on the present, and the present is bad. We have a tendency to think, I don't want to think about the past. A lot of times we have regrets about that. And I don't want to think about the future. I don't think there is much of one. It doesn't seem very bright. When we're faced with something big enough, it consumes the present. It takes over, and we kind of get locked into thinking that this is all there's going to be, and it to the point of drowning out the past or the future. Here's one thing I learned from Hagar. When I face a bad situation, I need to think about where I've come from and where I'm headed. First question's easier to answer. If I focus with the right perspective, I'll remember something pretty important about my past. And I think you will too. You'll remember all the times that God has come through for you in the past. And you'll also remember a lot of the blessings that we tend to take for granted. The other question's a little harder to face. Where are you going? That's a significant question. It implies something really important, that the present is not going to stay the way it is. The present might be rough, but things are going to change. I'd like to suggest we can use this account about Hagar as guidance next time it's your turn to be in a bad spot, to deal with the situation. But remember where you've come from and where you're going. Something else to keep in mind, God is well aware of your situation. He is a God who sees you. Maybe sometimes you think he's overlooking you, or that maybe you don't play a big enough part. I mean, who are you? I don't know if you've ever thought that before. In the grand scheme of things, it might seem you're mostly just a footnote. What this account tells me, as far as God is concerned, no one is a footnote. Even if you're in the middle of a bunch of mistakes, God is deeply aware of you just as much as he was aware of Abraham, Moses, Peter, Jesus. There's no lesser setting for his attention towards you. When it comes to having God's attention, you are not on a lesser setting. He is very interested in you on a level of biblical proportions. Let's go to Psalm 139. This passage always astounds me. And I don't think we have to pull any punches here. This means exactly what it says. Psalm 139, I'm going to start with the very first verse. And this is true about God, and it's true about you. Psalm 139, starting with verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there's a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay a hold of me. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, and the light around me will be night. Even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike to you. For you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance. And in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. In other words, God knew about every single day you have ever lived, even before he created you. I believe he knows you better than you do. He knew about you before you were born. He knew about you before creation. I think he was that aware that you would play a part in this existence. So whether things are going well right now or things are not going well, you need to know this at least. God is the one who sees you. Not just so he can notice your mistakes, but to notice your struggles, your fears, and your hopes. He doesn't just see you, he sees you at the deepest level. He knows you better than anyone. He knows you better than you. Sometimes when you watch a football game or some sports event, they'll have that camera going, and it'll just kind of randomly pick out people in the audience, all the spectators, and the camera will pinpoint people in the crowd, and you notice their reaction. They get very excited. And they start waving because they see themselves on the big screen. They're kind of, I guess it's the thrill. I don't know if you've ever been in that position. You realize I'm being seen by a bunch of people. Maybe that's what it is, the thrill of being seen by so many. Or when you watch some of the morning news shows and they have the window behind them and all the people holding up signs and waving. There's people in the background and they're waving and smiling. I think it's because they know they're being seen, possibly by millions of people. It's kind of their 15 minutes. They're going to be briefly famous. There's something about knowing that you've been picked out of the crowd, at least for a moment, that you're not just another face. For a few seconds, you sort of matter. Before we sing this next song together, please believe me when I tell you, God picks you out of the crowd every single moment, every single day. You never lose his attention. To him, you never blend in. You're not just another face. You matter to him so much, he sent his son to die so he could get you back. So your response to that is very significant. No matter where you are at spiritually right now, it's important to ask yourself two questions, and it's the same questions Hagar didn't answer. First, where have you been? All of us have taken different roads to be here at this present time, at this place. But if you look back, I think you'll remember that life has a tendency to go better when you move toward God, which leads us to the next question. Where are you going? I recommend all of us that we make a real effort to move toward God, not just settle into neutral, but to consciously every day move closer to God, our Father. He's proven time and again how much he loves us. And the least we can do is show how much we care about him. Whatever your need is at this time, I encourage you to respond in some way as we stand together and sing.
Softly and tenderly Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home. Ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home. Why should we tarry when Jesus is pleading, pleading for you and for me? Why should we linger and heed in his mercies, mercies for you and for me? Come home, come home. Ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home. Oh, for the wonderful love he has promised, promised for you and for me. Though we have sinned, he has mercy and pardon, pardon for you and for me. Come home, come home. Ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home. Please remain standing for the closing prayer.
Holy Father,